Visas, check. Passports, check. Tickets, check. Bags, check. Okay, what are we waiting for? Let's go.
We arrived at Mumbai International Airport at about 3 a.m. The customs queue was pretty long, and by the time we had cleared it, about 45 minutes later, I was already feeling a bit hutful. When exiting the terminus, you're immediately informed that you are definitely in India. Along one wall of the ramp leading out of the arrivals area was a very large art installation depicting various aspects of Indian history and culture. Now, being the little optimist that I am, I was extremely relieved to find that our luggage appeared on the turnstile relatively unmolested. Our first order of business thereafter was to draw some money, quite a nerve-wracking experience given the widely held belief that everybody and everything in India is designed to rip you off. This, however, proceeded without much incident, and armed with the requisite rupees, we proceeded to receive our first fleecing of the trip, in the form of booking a taxi from the airport to our hotel in Colaba, in the south of the city, about 45 minutes drive away. To put this in perspective, we were charged 1,400 rupees for this trip. The return trip a few days later, once we were a little wiser of local conditions, cost us 500 rupees. The drive through the still slumbering city was actually quite eerie. Deprived of the clarity of sight afforded by daylight, our other senses took over. Primarily the sense of smell came into play. We smelt the coastal fog and the aroma of burning fires, which were the predominant aroma. We smelt the fish markets, the tanneries, the spice markets, the industrial areas spewing their effluent into the defenseless atmosphere. We also got our first taste of Indian driving, which can best be summed up in the phrase, "the ends justify the means." After arriving at a hotel, we slept for a few hours and then hit the streets. Shortly after doing which, we were accosted by a very friendly chap who offered to lead us to a tourist information center. This, obviously, turned out to be a very capitalist commercial travel agent. Thinking, what the hell, fricadelle, we might as well use these guys, we booked a driver for the 12 days trip through Rajasthan, our internal plane tickets, as well as train trips. The following day, we actually got to do a bit of sightseeing. We went and had a look at the gateway to India, the Chhatrapati Shivaji train terminus, and had a nice walk along Marine Drive to Chowpatty Beach. We had a very pleasant dinner on a rooftop restaurant a few blocks away from our hotel, and then hit the sack in preparation for our early rise and plane trip to Udaipur the next day.
After a 2-hour delay at Mumbai Airport, we were immensely relieved to see a man holding a board with my name on it when we exited Udaipur's airport, primarily because it meant that we had not been scammed by the nice gentleman at the Tourist Information Centre in Mumbai. Neeraj dropped us at our guest house late in the afternoon, and we decided that we would just have a shower, grab a bite to eat, and do some admin before starting our explorations the next day. Our gracious host, Salim, and his lovely family made us feel right at home, and we sat on the rooftop for dinner, where we were treated to a fabulous fireworks display, which is a nightly occurrence in India during marriage season, accompanied by a live singer from some or other function just a short distance from our Haveli, who sang melodiously into the wee hours of the morning. Ed and I were enchanted. It felt almost as if this show had been put on especially to welcome us to India. The next day, Neeraj picked us up and took us sightseeing. We drove around Lake Piccoli and Lake Fateh Sigar before wandering around Sahelion Kibayari Gardens. Then we refrained from buying anything at the textile shop we were taken to because our budget has been severely slashed with the revised plan to get a driver. We stopped along the lake drive for a scrumptious pani puri nom nom, which went against everything that Ed and I had vowed not to eat. Water, salad, uncooked food. It was the only time we were that disobedient, and luckily it didn't backfire on us. We then went back to the old city, and Neeraj left us to carry on by foot since the narrow streets in old Udaipur don't allow for the passage of cars. We wandered around the crowded streets for a while and found our way to the city palace, a magnificent complex that once housed the Raj and his retinue. Here we spent about 2 hours investigating the buildings before embarking on a sunset cruise around Lake Picoli, out to Jagmanda Lake Palace, passing the famous Taj Lake Palace, where parts of Octopussy were filmed. Dinner at our Haveli was splendid. Salim had been a chef in a 5-star hotel in Australia for a few years, and we thoroughly enjoyed his Indian fare. The next day, Niraj took us on an outing to a very pretty, albeit run-down and mostly unused Hindu temple in the surrounding rural area, and after that, we visited a little village called Eklinji, where we attended a worship ceremony at the very much in use little temple there. We did the whole shoes off, flower offering, shuffle around, pray, eat coconut thingy. Neither of us felt any urgency to repeat this experience. We bought a very cool snack from one of the street food vendors. It's called mirchi vada, which translates as chili bread, but it is like a chili popper. Chili stuffed with a spicy potato mixture which is dipped in some kind of bread dough and then deep fried. That was the start of my love affair with this snack. We travelled up to the Monsoon Palace. The Raj was so worried about the floods in monsoon season that he got his architects to build a palace on the highest piece of ground that he could see from the city palace. It amuses Ed no end because it is such an overkill. You would need floods of biblical proportions to reach the Monsoon Palace. Anyway, after that we went back to the Haveli, and in that evening we rushed down to watch the dance show at a lovely old building close by and had a late dinner at our Haveli. Niraj picked us up early the next morning for our long haul to Jodhpur. On our way to Jodhpur from Udaipur, we visited Piplantri, an out-of-the-way village where they plant 111 trees every time a girl is born. This is unheard of in India. I think it's the start of a new movement, a new consciousness of the importance of the role of women in society.
The drive from Udaipur to Jodhpur afforded us our first taste of Indian highway driving conditions. Arriving, eventually, in Jodhpur, we understood why a distance of 500 kilometers is considered a day's drive in India. Getting to our lodgings in Jodhpur, the rather euphemistically named cozy guest house, required a bit of a hike, since it was in the old part of the city, which is not accessible by car due to the narrowness of the ancient streets. This was to become a recurring experience on our trip. We dined at the hotel's rooftop restaurant, which overlooked the illuminated Miranga Fort, which we set out to explore the following day. Navigating the crowded, narrow streets of the old blue city, the fort loomed larger and larger until, standing in front of its walls, we were struck by the immensely formidable sight which would have greeted would-be invaders of this seemingly impregnable Mughal fortification. Perched on a rocky hill, the fort seems to rise out of the rock as if summoned into existence by some supernatural force. More an extension of the hill on which it rests, rather than a man-made extension to it. The fort was amazing. To call it a fort does not do it justice. It is a castle, and one which must surely rival the most impressive castles in Europe. It was a history nerd's dream. It is made up of both military and purely utilitarian areas, as well as palace areas, the opulence of which boggles the mind. Given the fact that the valuables were largely plundered by the British, the fact that what remains is so mind-blowingly impressive bears testament to what must have been the almost incalculable wealth and majesty of the Mughal Empire. Whilst going through the fort, I kept thinking that I couldn't believe that we hadn't been taught about this at school. There is so much of the world about which we, with our largely Western education, are completely ignorant. We were fully impressed.
Unless you have actually been to India, you will not understand what it is like to drive in India. I'm not even referring to the pandemonium in the cities. I'm talking about driving from one city to another. When planning a road trip, if you think it should conservatively take about 2.5 hours to do, you need to double that time in India. A 250-kilometer drive is easily a 5 to 7 hour event. You cannot expect to do more than 500 kilometers in one day, and don't drive at night. It's just not worth it. We hardly ever managed to go faster than, say, 80 kilometers per hour for more than 10 minutes at a time, and that's due to the fact that the distances between villages on these arteries of India are so tiny. So before you know it, you're back to travelling 10 kilometers an hour while avoiding the domestic animals, wildlife and livestock scattered across the roads, not to mention the thousands of motorbikes and trucks haphazardly weaving in and out of everywhere. And all of this before you've even mentioned the pedestrians, which include young children still in nappies, playing in and next to the roadside. Jaipur is known as the Pink City. Most of the buildings were built from using the sandstone from the surrounding area, which is a predominantly pink color. It's like a pinky salmony color, actually. It's like very pretty. Eventually, we dropped at our hotel, Rawala Mrignani Palace, which was some fat cat bureaucrat's haveli in the days of the Rajas. It was beautifully adorned with stained glass windows and some artifacts that dated back to those times. We were warmly welcomed by a shower of petals, a traditional blessing, and a garland of flowers around our necks. Since it was quite late already, we decided to eat at the hotel and leave the exploring for the next day. Dinner was on one of the roof levels, but it was enclosed in a sort of cage. We found out why the next morning. Langur monkeys trying their luck at some tasty treats. After the monkey business, Niraj drove us out to Amer, a small town outside Jaipur, famous for the Amber Fort. You could wend your way up to the fort atop an elephant in the manner of the Rajas of old, but we decided that we weren't that keen. It seems to lessen the magnificence of those majestic beasts. Amber Fort is not as big as the other forts and palaces that we had seen, but it still has a real sense of presence. It is worth every cent you will spend to see it, with its summer and winter palaces and their ancient yet ingenious cooling and heating systems, as well as the water pumping system to draw water up from the lake. That evening we ventured out to a restaurant not far from our hotel, and we were accosted by a rather loathsome fellow who Ed took an instant disliking to. He attached himself to us while we were eating, and we eventually had to extricate ourselves from him in the politest possible manner. The next day was fantastic. We drove out to the monkey temple on the outskirts of Jaipur. This is a holy place of worship, and there are 3 pools of cleansing, one for women, one for men, and one for the Banda monkeys. We spent a good few hours there, mostly feeding the monkeys with bananas and then going up to the temple at the very top of the hill for a blessing. Afterwards, we went back to Jaipur to see the Palace of the Winds. This is a building that was made for the ladies from the harem so that they could watch the city life going by without actually being seen themselves. It is a very, very ornate, pretty facade. We had an early start the next day as we were off to Agra.
The drive to Agra was rather interesting. Some disgruntled strikers had decided to burn a bus on the freeway. The authorities responded by rerouting the traffic via a detour with the intention of circumventing the action on the freeway and allowing the Agra-bound traffic to rejoin said freeway on the other side of the obstruction. This did not sit well with the strikers, who then foiled this intervention by burning another bus on the detour. The resulting detour of the detour afforded us the opportunity to see a part of rural Rajasthan which was truly off the beaten track. Said track was in fact so unbeaten in certain places that we were extremely relieved that we were not traversing it in our own car. In the end, the trip, which should have covered 240 kilometers and taken 4 hours, ended up taking 7 hours. But as dusk fell at the end of a rather eventful day, and we finally drove into Agra, we were rewarded with our first glimpse of the majestic Taj Mahal. The following morning, we arose at ridiculous o'clock and made our way to the Moon Gardens. so that we could be in position and ready to point lenses at the awesome sight of the Taj Mahal at dawn. With ethereal mists rising off the Yamuna River, the sun crept over the horizon and cast its first rays on the dome of the Taj. We had breakfast at a little roadside dhaba. Kim had what she claimed to be the best omelette of her life, and I munched on very tasty curried chickpeas, whilst a rather cute little goat munched on the apparently equally tasty strap of my backpack. From there we drove the short distance to the Red Fort. As impressive as this fort is, its story is tinged with sadness. As Shah Jahan's obsession with his grief and the monument which he had erected to his lost love increasingly prevented him from being a capable leader, his son, Aurangzeb, seized upon his father's weakness and deposed him. Shah Jahan was forced to live the rest of his days a prisoner in the Red Fort, gazing out across the river Yamuna at the beautiful tomb of his beloved Mumtaz. After a brief and rather cold shower stop at the hotel, it was back to the Moon Gardens for more pictures of the Taj at dusk. The next morning we were up at even more ridiculous o'clock to be at the Taj ticket office by 6. We were conveyed by electric bus to the entrance of the Taj, as it is surrounded by a 1 kilometer air pollution-free zone. After a very lengthy and thorough security check, we proceeded through the eastern gate. A peculiar optical illusion occurs when one does so. Walking through the archway toward the main building, it seems to get smaller as you move towards it, until, as you emerge into the garden, it miraculously regains its rightful size. I have only one word to describe this place: awesome. The next morning, the extremely friendly and competent Vijendra Singh, proprietor of Agra Beat Tours, took us on a fantastic tour through the countryside surrounding the Taj. Travelling by bicycle, it was a short pedal, or in my case, wobble, down to the banks of the Yamuna River and onto a boat from which we gazed up at Shah Jahan's awesome monument. Then it was back on the bikes and into the countryside. We rode past wheat fields and grazing cattle, stopping to chat to locals along the way, with Vijendra informing us about rural Indian life. The setting was a photographer's dream, affording us views of the Taj not normally seen by tourists. In my opinion, the best shots of our entire Indian holiday were taken on this tour. We visited a local school and then cycled on to watch a carpet weaver practicing his trade as his ancestors had done for centuries before him. We had a cup of chai with a local farming family and were shown how wheat is ground into flour on a traditional stone grinding wheel, and how fodder is made for the cows, a sort of high-energy cereal and vegetable porridge, which I was sure could turn into a pretty potent beer if allowed to ferment. Remounting our bikes, we rode back to the Agra Beat HQ for a delicious breakfast. All in all, a very enjoyable morning and an excellent tour which we can highly recommend to anybody visiting Agra. How's that for a snore, boys?
The train trip from Agra to Khajuraho was rather long. It was 9 hours long, but it was pretty uneventful. We did have another couple sharing our compartment for the first half an hour, and after that we were on our own. We arrived in Khajuraho at about 7 p.m. and caught a tuk-tuk to our hotel. I chose Khajuraho as a place of interest based on the fact that it was more or less a halfway stop between Agra and Bandhavgarh, and because of the temples. Its remote location is the main reason that the 85 temples in the 3 temple complexes were saved from the ravages of Islamic raiders and are largely undamaged. The architecture and sculptures are astounding, and the sheer size and numbers are quite overwhelming. Eventually, it is simply too much to absorb. I would love to know more about the people whose stories make up the construction of this incredible group of temples. The temple complexes are a UNESCO World Heritage Site and were built between the 9th and 10th centuries. The main temple attraction is Kandaraya Mahadev Temple, and it has over 800 sculptures covering it. That's just one of the temples.
As we drove from Khajuraho to Bandhavgarh Tiger Sanctuary, our surroundings started to look more and more like a scene from the Jungle Book. A moment of comic relief was provided when our driver, Rum, pointed out, "A bear house?" "A bear house?" inquired Kim. "Yes, a bear house, where you store wheat and grain." Kim: "Oh, a warehouse." Easy vibe. You can't make this shit up. This little bugger made me squeal like a 3-year-old girl. After an hour and a half's wait at the watering hole, Raj, a magnificent 5-year-old male tiger, eventually emerged from the bush. A dozen camera-armed jeep loads of eager image hunters fixed him in their sights and let loose a volley of shots, the rival of which I've only ever witnessed on TV when watching celebs alight from their limos at the Oscars. But this star burned more brightly than any of those. He sauntered like a magnificent embodiment of graceful yet savage energy across the road, quenched his thirst, and lay down in the water. With a regal turn of his head, his eyes stared directly into mine. I was mesmerized. Chilling after chasing tigers. Spotted deer. Samba deer. Egrets. Lots of peacocks. A little green job. More peacocks. And the red jungle fowl, otherwise known as jungle chicken. Heffalumps. Heffalumps looking for tigers. Very wild trees. Tea break. With lovely little nummies. Goodbye, Bandhavgarh.
We were once again thrust into the heaving hordes when we got off the train in Varanasi. As India's holiest Hindu city, Varanasi has a steady influx of pilgrims on some form of spiritual journey. The sacred Ganges, or as she is affectionately known, Ma Ganga, is the resting place for many Hindus, as it is believed that if you die in Varanasi, your soul will proceed directly to heaven, and you can avoid dealing with karma and reincarnation. Many sick and old people come here waiting to hear Shiva whisper in their ears as they are dying, bestowing on them instant salvation. We were very tired and having some difficulty readjusting to the crazy pace of urban India, so we went straight to our guest house. That took an hour of jostling, which was right on the banks of the river, and tried to settle in only to discover that we hadn't been given the room we had booked. This room didn't have a private bathroom. We were expected to share a toilet and shower with 2 other rooms. Not acceptable. And so badly timed. I had a shower anyway because I was just feeling so grimy, and Ed did some polite negotiating and got us moved into another room, which was still not the one we had booked, but at least it had a shower and loo. We had a quiet dinner on the rooftop overlooking the nightly activities on the river. The next day, Ed did some more very polite, very firm negotiating, which lasted about an hour, and he managed to get us moved to the correct room, which had a balcony and overlooked beautiful Ma Ganga, and which had a toilet and shower. Yay! We had decided that we were not up to wandering around the streets of Varanasi. Luckily for us, as I mentioned, we were directly above the river. Turn left out of the little lobby, down a steep flight of stairs, and we were in the Munshikhat and could hop onto a boat for a trip up and down the river. Varanasi is made up of more than 6 kilometers of ghats, pronounced with a soft K, on the western bank of the Ganges. The 90 or so ghats along the river definitely define Varanasi. Each ghat has its own purpose, predominantly related to Hindu spiritual rituals, like bathing and lessons in scriptures and rows of priests who sit under parasols waiting to perform prayers. Of course, there are also countless opportunities for charlatans and false sadhus to prey on the naive. You have to be vigilant and wary of any offers you may get, At one point, we had to be quite firm, read rude, to get a man to stop trying to massage me.
Getting to Darjeeling from Varanasi by train was, to put it very politely, a bit of a trial. If you would like to listen to my 5-minute rant on the subject, you'll have to stand by for what is rapidly turning into our 3-hour epic Indian travel documentary. I'll cut to the chase and state for the record that we absolutely loved Darjeeling. Thanks to our little train fiasco, we only had 1 day there, which was a great pity because we could easily have stayed for a week. After eventually arriving at New Jalpaiguri station from Varanasi, we shared a taxi with another couple whom we had met on the train and set out on the 88-kilometer journey up to Darjeeling, which would take us from around 100 meters above sea level to about 2,100 meters. In true Indian fashion, those 88 kilometers took us 3 hours to traverse. Darjeeling is in the foothills of the Himalayas and feels like a sort of hybrid between India and its northeastern neighbors. The influence of Buddhism becomes apparent. Facial features change, and in general manners improve dramatically. There is a genteel air about the place, which puts one at ease. People are genuinely friendly, with absolutely no ulterior motive. Here we could walk the streets completely unmolested. If we appeared lost, someone would approach us politely and ask if we required any help. It was like being in a friendly, hospitable rural small town. The bulk of the population did not appear affluent by middle-class standards, but there was certainly none of the air of near desperation which is apparent in other Indian cities. We did have a pretty good hike around town and also visited a tea plantation, which was quite interesting. The restaurants in Darjeeling are a lot more varied than in many other places we visited in India, and you can get a decent burger with bacon without having to pay New York prices for the privilege. We also met a very nice couple, Ajay and Rusha. Ajay was very interested in South Africa, as he is a Navy fighter pilot and has been to South Africa a few times to practice blowing shit up with our Navy. Hopefully when we return to India, we'll be able to hook up with them. And yes, we definitely will be returning to India, and when we do, we most certainly will be spending at least a week in Darjeeling.
I cannot emphasize enough how absolutely incredibly beautiful and peaceful it is there. It's a Baha'i house of worship where everybody is welcome. There's no discrimination in any way, shape, or form. It was an absolutely awesome experience for me. It touched and wrapped itself around the root of who I am. Now when I think about the Lotus Temple, I can still feel the connection very powerfully. A place of such immense tolerance in a tumultuous world. Kitab Minar, at 72 meters, is the tallest brick minaret in the world. It is quite extraordinary, and there are no photos that can do it justice. There is no mortar holding the stones together, only a system of specially angled, interlocking jigsaw pieces. The bricks are hand-carved, and many of them are curved to follow the arc of the spherical columns, which also taper. If you think about that, you can't help but be impressed by this construction. We visited Old Delhi and spent a good few hours bumping our way through Chandni Chowk on a bicycle rickshaw. Chandni Chowk gets 7 million visitors every day. Just let that sink in. Think about it. 7 million. I don't even know how to comprehend that many people in one place. Chandni Chowk means moonlit canals, and that seems pretty romantic. Maybe it was once upon a time, but now it's a hive. It's a warren, it's a nest. It's teeming with a cross-section of lives. Holy cows lazily wandering past a man, wearily manhandling a cart piled full of nachis, his sole purpose to sell enough to feed his family for one more day. The inevitable tourist on a bicycle rickshaw, whiplash curious, mesmerized by the heady sensory overload. Chandni Chowk is a maze, and, amazing, we caught a tuk-tuk to Jantar Mantar. There are about 4 Jantar Mantars dotted around India. This place is extraordinary. I don't know why we didn't learn about this at school. It was built in 1723, and it is something to do with astronomical tables and the predicting of times and movements of suns and moons and planets. It is unbelievable. Ugrasan Ki Baioli is a very old stepwell, an incredible piece of history nestled amongst modern Delhi. Overlooked by the busy regulars, the Baioli imparts a feeling of some magical hidden place, reserved only for those who dare to seek it out. Ed loved the sense of history that is steeped in the very stones of the well. One can easily imagine the ghosts of a bygone age congregating at this central point, collecting water for their daily chores. Delhi reminded me vaguely of Harare, the city of my birth. Echoes and remnants of the same colonistic powers, perhaps? Ed was put in mind of our capital city, Chwani, for very similar reasons. We got our tuk-tuk driver to drive us past India Gate for a quick selfie, then onto Humayun's tomb, which is a place that I need to revisit. By the time we had gone about a third of the way around the compound, I suddenly wanted to be anywhere but there. I think that I had just reached my quota of tombs and palaces and forts and history, so I really didn't afford this graceful compound the attention and respect that it deserves. Constructed out of red sandstone, it was the first ever garden-style tomb to be erected in India and served as an early example for other Mughal tombs like the Taj Mahal. Ed and I made our way rapidly along the streets of the rather trendy little village of modern Haus Khas, with its art galleries, hip-hop clothing boutiques, hotspot restaurants and happening nightclubs, and through a gateway that could pass as a real-life entrance onto platform 9 3/4 into the magical, bygone era of ancient Haus Khas.
Well, good evening, boys and girls. It's about 10 o'clock on Friday night, the 11th of March, and this is it, boys and girls. This is the last video in India. About a month ago, we tried to come to this place, Chowpatty Beach night food market in Mumbai, and it was closed off for some special function. So we had about, I don't know, 8 or 9 hours in Mumbai. So we decided to get a taxi and take a long drive through the city and come here for supper and go back to the airport. And here we are. There are all the little stalls, and we have just eaten just about as much as any normal human being can eat for less than 100 Rand. So, good times, and the chow is bloody good. And so, this is goodbye to India, basically. From here, we're heading back to the airport, probably about an hour's drive, and then we're leaving on a jet plane. Don't know when I'll be back again, but gonna be back. Ne blomi. Yeah, this place is crazy, man. But somehow it just gets under your skin. 'Cause it can be the most irritating, obnoxious, just like tiring place on earth, and at the same time it's like the most rewarding, interesting, friendly place you could find as well. So you just, in one day in India, you can experience your entire range of emotions. Like, there are times when I just really wanted to hit the pause button because I was having no fun whatsoever, and there were other times when I just wished that time could stand still. But yeah, man, it's an interesting place. You got to do it. Come with us next time.
Except Brian.
Yes, except Brian. There's way too much spitting. Okay, well, that's us from Chowpatty Beach, Mumbai. Good night.